Hey folks, it's your buddy Mike Messier here on One Pro Wrestling and Sports Fan YouTube channel, and I'm also doing this on LinkedIn and also in the Foreign Object Facebook wrestling group over there on Facebook. And tonight it's actually two pro wrestling and sports fans. I got my buddy Jimmy FALLUCA from Staten Island tonight, right, Jimmy?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me. Got to say, love the name, The Foreign Object. I know it's just a real catchy name.
You know, buddy, that's the current name of the Facebook wrestling group. I also have that as my eBay store, the Foreign Object, all lowercase, one big word. And the actual origins goes all the way back uh, to when I was in college covering ECW house shows in New England. I wrote a column called "The Foreign Object" for a local newspaper, and I interviewed the likes of Taz, Shane Douglas. I was there in person for the New Jack Eric Koulos incident,
Uh,
stabbing, as it were. I interviewed Eric at his home in Cranston, Rhode Island. Shortly after that, a couple of times, I had sandwiches with his family. I a bunch of stuff. But tonight, buddy, we have a very special second part topic. First of all, I do want to acknowledge that you've had a rough couple of weeks, and whatever you want to say about that, the floor is yours for a couple of minutes. If you want to talk about
well,
that, go ahead.
well, yeah. Well, most know me know that my father has dealt with a lot of health issues.
Yeah,
So it's trying. Especially when you have a parent who's been as incredible as mine. I'm sure it's biased for me to say, but I can, especially now that I'm a parent myself of two healthy boys, thank God, I can say beyond any shadow of a doubt that my father's an exceptional person. The sacrifices he's made, the the torment that he's dealt with his health. I'm not going to dive too deep into all the health issues he's had. I'll put it to you this way: this is a guy that went from willingly working three jobs to a guy who is not allowed to work.
yeah,
And as a gentleman, you want to give as much as you can to take care of your family. And when it's taken away from you, without your say so, it's got to do something to your psyche. I have no doubt that definitely hurt him. But I feel good in knowing that my sons, aside from myself, my sister, my grandparents, his parents who are still with us, thank God, you know, they've given him that extra push to, soldier on and not let his health really, dictate his level of happiness. When I see him, playing with my kids, it's a good feeling, when you see your dad, having making great memories with your kids,
yeah.
and from the day I first brought her to meet my parents, my wife was immediately bonded with my dad. They're like buddies since I got married. Now that they're always watching horror movies together, they're always playing jokes on me, and it's listen, as hard as life is, I can honestly say I'm living the dream. I have a very good job. I'm in good health. I have good kids. I have an excellent wife. I have a good family. And you know what? No matter how much we get aggravated through nonsense at work, sports, pro wrestling, when you got the life that I have, I have no complaints, Mike. And honestly, the little things that I get to do like this is a highlight for me. So
What's your
I'm
dad's first name, Jimmy? What's your dad's
Joseph.
first name?
His name is Joseph, just like
Okay.
mine. The family tradition is you name your firstborn after your son. Matter of fact, the whole reason I'm a wrestling fan is because of my dad. Quick
Yeah, I
little,
was gonna say that. Go ahead.
quick little story. When my dad worked for the Department of Sanitation, he helped bring the handicapped kids into Madison Square Garden for the wrestling shows.
Right.
So his boss would tell him, "Listen, bring your son to the show." To bring me and my grandfather, God rest his soul, my mom's father, and I'll never forget the first wrestling show he ever brought me to. It was in Madison Square Garden. I saw Shawn Michaels. I saw the Macho Man Randy Savage. Then my father said, "Someone's going to come out. I know you're going to like him. Just sit back and watch." And the next thing I knew, the lights went down, and I saw this guy with a black hat, long black coat. He went in with the dim lights, cut a promo. He started walking his way back. I heard the eerie funeral music. And as you know from watching, you never saw Undertaker really slapping hands with fans. but he was shaking a couple of the kids' hands, and I stuck my hand out, and he shook my hand, and I still have the Polaroid picture. The next time we do a show, I promise I'll have it with me. I took the Polaroid picture, and you could see the gray tie, the hat, that old garb, and it changed my life. And I'll never forget when I met him in 2015, thanks to my wife. I brought that Polaroid picture with me, and I showed it to him. And I told him I took this picture of you in Madison Square Garden when I was 3 years old. And then I told him when we had Hurricane Sandy here in Staten Island, all my pictures were in a Rubbermaid down in the basement, and we had water down there. So, and I made sure I got my pictures because I had pictures of family, friends, and that picture in there. And he saw the water damage, and he said, "You kept this all this time?" I said, "Of course I did. You were my hero when I was a kid." And he stood up, all 6'11" of him, stuck his hand at me and said, "Thanks, man." And it was a moment that I will treasure. And I have this because of my dad. So any joy or aggravation I get from wrestling, I owe it to him.
Well, that's great. My dad was the first person that took me to a wrestling show, and I can totally relate to everything you're saying. So Joseph Falluca, we've given him our support here, and I did want to acknowledge him because, like you said, he's the gentleman that not only helped you become a wrestling fan, but also these kids, these special needs kids. He helped them enjoy a great night, and of all the criticisms I have for the WWE, the WWF, I do give them a lot of credit. They've done the Make-A-Wish thing for 30 or 40 or 50 years now.
Oh,
They've yeah, so they do look out for people in those situations. Let's talk about a gentleman who was also a fan of The Undertaker. Actually, most of the wrestling world is a fan of The Undertaker, Mark Callis. I believe Terry Funk was actually instrumental in helping get Mark Calloway to WCW back in 1990, where he was Mean Mark Callis. But I want to talk. I think last time we talked about Terry Funk first, and then we kind of slipped into Bray Wyatt. I thought we'd flip the switch on this. This time, let's start with Bray. Just so you know, Jimmy, I've been doing some Bray Wyatt research. I've been just as I was coming in for tonight, I was listening to the Matt Hardy podcast. Of course, he was WWE Tag Team Champions, World Tag Team Champions with Bray Wyatt for a cup of coffee, as they say.
Cup of coffee, big time.
Yeah, yeah, the cream of the crop. So they were tag team champions. I think they even won a battle royal together at WrestleMania. Like they had a dark match at a WrestleMania that I think Bray Wyatt won, but Matt Hardy helped him. Or maybe
It was the reverse. It was Matt Hardy was about to beat, and then Bray appeared and assisted him in winning, and that's where they became a tag team, better known as the Deleters of Worlds. I think that because they liked working with each other, they said, because they had a program against each other. And I think what ended up happening was, you know what? We work so well against each other, we probably make a good tag team. Very similar to, if you remember, you're a big ECW fan. That's how the Public Enemy came to be, because those two guys apparently worked against each other so often that Paul Heyman decided, you know what, let's make them a tag team. And then the Public Enemy was born. Same principle here. They worked together against each other, and then they became a tag team, and allegedly they became pretty close, off screen, which, you're on the road with each other 300 days a year. It's only natural that, bonds are going to form. And, as sad as we are as fans who, some of us like myself got to get to know Wyndham Rotunda, the man, which I consider myself very fortunate. I can only imagine the pain and the sorrow that the guys that actually saw him day in and day out are going through, because, you never hear anyone saying a bad thing about Wyndham Rotunda, because this is a guy that, more and more stories are coming out that this is a guy that went out of his way to not only be there for his fellow wrestlers, but he went out of his way to help people. And, it's sad that you only hear these things after something horrible like this happens. But yeah, Matt Hardy was pretty close with him, and I can't even imagine how he feels.
Yeah, and Matt Hardy's a guy that I believe Hardy also has 4 kids and a wife, just like Bray did. So I mean, it's intense. And Bray Wyatt, as we've said and everybody said, he's only 36 years old.
It's been
And let me ask you this, Jimmy. Did you catch the SmackDown tribute show to Terry Funk and Bray Wyatt? Did you happen to catch that episode?
I absolutely did, and my sister requested that I watch that show with her. Um,
Okay.
no, I am not one that likes to watch live WWE. I am of the perspective that if I'm going to sit and blow 2 to 3 hours of my time, I feel like it has to be an overall product that's worth my time. And I haven't felt that way in a while. But for that particular show, I put my pride aside and I said, it's not about me. Tonight is about Terry Funk and Bray Wyatt. And because I have no shame in saying I loved both performers, I enjoyed both performers immensely. I felt it was only right that if there's a tribute show, I need to see it. To see those highlight packages, that opening. You could see a lot of the wrestlers were emotional, which I can't blame them. It was very hard. The hardest part for me was seeing the pictures of his wife, his kids. I can't even imagine the pain that Mike is going through, because to me that's a fate worse than death. And I don't mean to be morbid or anything,
Sure.
but I would much rather not exist than live in a world where I don't have my sons. And when you have children, it is essentially having your heart outside of your body, because they come from you. They're a
Right.
part of you. And I believe William Moody, the late great Paul Bear, said it perfectly when he did his shoot interview with Ring of Honor with Jim Cornette, because he had some depression issues because his son lost a newborn. And
Oh,
he said it's the most unnatural thing. Parents should not be watching, parents should not be burying their kids. And I shouldn't have had to watch my son bury his son. It's just
wow.
it's as unnatural as it can get. So I felt the worst. I feel bad for everyone involved, obviously, but I felt the most bad for his parents, because it's a heartbreak you never get over. I know I saw my aunt go through it, and his children that now have to carry on without their father. And unfortunately, we live in a world where, I'm not trying to take this down a political route, but we live in a world now where the father in the household isn't looked at as important, but both parents are equally as important. So to know that they're not going to have their dad, I feel horrible for them, because if
It's a it,
I don't think
yeah.
I'd be the person I am without my father.
It's also complicated. Not to delve into the personal too much, but just a surface level complication is that I believe uh, uh, Wyndham or Bray's first 2 kids were with one lady, and then they kind of split up, and he went over and had a relationship with JoJo, and I believe they were engaged to be married, but not quite. And
They
they
were
have
They were supposed to be married they were supposed to be married this December. I only
right.
know my sister has a relationship with the family. She actually speaks with JoJo's mother every other month. So
Yeah.
you know, that's the only reason I know that. And it's just it's a horrible situation. And finding out about the defibrillator, knowing that if he would have had that with him, it could have saved his life, it makes it all the more tragic, because this was a death that didn't have to happen. And I don't know if anyone has realized this. Had WWE known about these heart issues, I have no doubt in my mind he would have been forced into retirement, because look at Triple H with his cardiac issues. And I think we can all universally agree that we all would have been perfectly content with Wyndham Rotunda retiring and being with us than continuing onward and something like this happening.
Yeah, it's because it's interesting. And just to finish the thought, he did have 2 children with JoJo too. So now there's a total of 4 very young kids.
Mhm.
And 2 with JoJo and 2 with his previous lady. So it's tough. It's complicated. I think the only thing that I can say that's positive on that end is it does seem that Rotunda family is pretty tight knit. Between Mike Rotundo is the the grandfather of these children, Jojo, and his uncle is Barry Windham, and so
Yes.
I think it's not like this guy was alone by any stretch of the
No,
imagination. He does have a
not
support system.
not at
Let me.
still it's good to see a family come together when bad things happen. Like I said, I feel horrible because this was something that could have been prevented. So, to anyone who's listening out there, if your doctor wants you to do certain things and it's for your benefit, try your best to heed those warnings. And when something doesn't feel right, be your own advocate. If something don't feel right, you make sure you take care of yourself and you get those things addressed. Don't put it off to the next day, because tomorrow's not guaranteed to any of us, folks.
Just on a medical front, Jimmy, because I know you know this answer better than I do. Defibrillator, is that the same thing that like the football player for the Buffalo Bills last season that he needed that they've been advocating for high school sports teams to have these defibrillators? Is that the same thing, or am I thinking of two
I
different things?
think that the defibrillator they wanted him to have was something that was for his personal use rather than something that would be part of, staff equipment. But it's essentially, I think it was essentially the thing, if I'm not mistaken, because when you're having a cardiac event, sometimes your heart needs a little bit of a shock. See, what most people don't understand is that there's a certain electricity that does flow through your heart. And in order for your heart to work, that electricity has to flow. It starts from the S. It'd be very difficult for me to explain in layman's terms,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there are these two nodes inside the heart. One's called the SA node and the AV node. The SA is for the atrium. The AV is for the ventricle. Those are two parts of the heart. That electricity flows from one to the other. And if you ever see a regular EKG,
Oh, yeah.
you'll see that there's a certain pattern. When you see the right the right lines, that shows you that everything's working in perfect order. Now, if you see something that's wrong, you could tell. Just for anyone that's taken an EKG class like I have would be able to tell you, okay, this line is not right. That means this part of the heart's not working. That's actually what I've actually been doing the last couple of weeks. I've been in a class specifically for that, because they want all nurses aides to be educated and be certified in that. God forbid there's an emergency on the floors. So the only reason I know that, and it's ironic that I started that chapter the day he died.
Wow.
That's what really hit home with me personally as a fan and as, just a human being. I'm like, I cannot believe I'm starting EKG testing the day this guy drops dead of a heart attack. That a
Yeah.
heart could have been prevented if he would not have left that defibrillator in his car and he would have had it on his person. Like I said, I have a very strong suspicion that his wrestling days were numbered
Right.
because of those cardiac issues. But I'll tell you what, I would have had absolutely no issue him announcing his retirement, saying, listen, unfortunately, I'm having certain health issues. I cannot wrestle anymore, but but I will still stay connected to you fans. I'm sure he would have did autograph signings if he wanted to. But then again, maybe it would have been too painful for him.
All he
Maybe
had to let me just jump in. He could have been a manager any day of the week, Jimmy. I mean, let's face
of
facts.
course he could have been in creative. The guy
Yeah,
had an
both.
amazing wrestling mind. I know a lot of people didn't care for some of the stuff that he did, but let me tell you something. The guy had a very, very good wrestling mind. He reminds me very much of a cross of Jake Roberts and Kevin Sullivan. I don't know if you ever got those vibes from him.
Sure.
He definitely, if you actually look at his body of work, he referenced several characters. He referenced Jake the Snake with his low voice, because that's how Jake used to pull people in. He referenced Mick Foley, because if you remember, when's the first time you ever saw a wrestler do a wrestling promo sitting in a rocking chair? It was
Right,
Mick
right, right.
Foley cutting the promo on Randy Orton. I remember that specifically because, number one, I'm a diehard Mick Foley fan. And number two, that was me and my sister. We watched wrestling together since we're children. But when we saw that feud between Foley and Orton, when Foley cut that promo and he took the barbed wire bat out of the gift box, we both went nuts because as kids, we knew who Cactus Jack was because of my dad. My dad was a huge Cactus Jack fan. Huge. Don't get me wrong. He loved Mankind. He thought Dude Love was funny. But my dad saw Cactus Jack drop the elbow on Sting live. He saw that.
Nice.
So
Was that the Bash at the Beach '96? Not, I'm sorry. Was that the '92
I believe it was.
Bash Beach Blast '92?
Okay.
Perhaps.
And Beach Blast '92 wasn't a bad show. I believe it also had Ricky Steamboat and Ravishing Rick Rude in the 30-minute Iron Man match, which was a classic.
Yes, it's good.
So we knew who Cactus Jack was. My dad never showed us his IWA Japan stuff, but I knew who Cactus was. So when we saw him pull out the barbed wire bat, I was saying to myself, is he going to wear the leopard skin for that match? And he did. So we were excited for that. But back to Bray. Bray took things from Foley and made them his own. Like, one of the things that I will always love Bray for as a performer, he resurrected the mandible claw. He
Yes.
made a devastating finishing move. And to me, I always loved that move because of how effective they had it, especially the first few years. I mean, I'm revealing myself as the diehard Taker fan I am, but that was the move that constantly put Taker down.
Yeah.
And I see the Fiend show up. The first person he hits with it is Foley. I figured he was just mocking Foley. Then he was hitting everyone with it. Immediately in my head, I'm saying to myself, how does the Fiend not retire the Undertaker? That in my head is what I was thinking long term. Took things from Nick. He took things from Jake. He obviously took things from Dan Spivey when he did the Cape Fear.
Waylon Mercy.
I don't know where you stood when it came to that, but I always felt that that character, the cult leader, had more mileage in it. The problem was, and even a very dear friend of mine, because we were having this conversation a few days ago, it is impossible to talk about Bray Wyatt without talking about the booking. And I personally believe, and I don't know if I'm I hope people don't think I'm over embellishing this because he passed, because I have been saying this for many years. Bray Wyatt very easily could have been this generation's psychological character that you take seriously. Not saying he would have been the next Undertaker, because there never will be. Just like there'll never be another Jake Roberts. But Taker was Taker. Jake was Jake. Bray very easily could have been that for this generation if they would have been a little bit smarter with when they chose to have him get beat. You know, because you know as well as I do, in order for fans to take someone seriously, they have to be able to back up their words. So that was really the only thing missing for Bray in my mind. Because when it came to the big matches, the fork in the road matches, the matches that actually mattered, most of the time he was the guy eating the pin. And that was even with help. So I felt that that hampered him a great deal. And I felt that that necessitated his transformation into the Fiend, because he had to remove himself from the cult leader character, because the cult leader character had no credibility. Now, had they been a little smarter with that, I feel that that character could have went on and on for years. And guess what? He could have been a big deal for them. I felt, and I don't know where you stand, and this is where I'm going to give you the floor. I felt that when the cult leader was coming into his own, he should have been presented as, when he chooses to come after you, it's a problem. If he wants to fight you, it's a problem. If he's fighting a big name, that big name is in trouble. And I just felt that they ended up making him a glorified job guy. And I felt horrible for him, because I'm saying to myself, this guy has a great character. He has great speaking ability. He sucks people in. He actually gets people on his side. Even though he was playing a villain, he was so good at it. Like Taker, like Austin, they became so good as bad guys, you wanted to like them.
Right.
And I felt that he had a ton of potential. And because he wasn't a priority for them, they never tapped into it. What do you say to that?
Well, I can see your point, and in a lot of ways I agree with you, but for the sake of conversation, I want to take the other side of the argument on this one. I'm going to say that for the time that Bray Wyatt came into the main roster, which I believe was 2014, the early days of the original groups, Bray, Luke Harper, and Eric Rowan, you know what I mean? And that's good old Luke Harper. But when they originally came in, Jimmy, there was also, I believe, they were preceded maybe by just a month or two by the Shield, or 3 or 4 months, something like that. So I think the Shield came in first, right?
They did.
So
The Shield came in Survivor Series 2012. The
right,
Wyatt family came in the summer of 2013.
okay, so about six or
The
seven
whole
months.
year, almost had a whole year on them. Almost.
Right. So my point is, you already had kind of the young upstart 3-man power trip, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, the WWE has already invested in Moxley, or Dean Ambrose at the time, Seth Rollins, and Roman Reigns. They've already got those guys working up the ladder as a 3-man team, and they are going to do. I think Ambrose had the U.S. title, and Seth and Roman had the tag team title at the same time,
You're correct.
and I think the Nexus thing had already come and gone, which Husky Harris, Wyndham Rotunda was part of that. So I think, to me, I try to look at the positive on this, because trust me, I can take your side of this, that they didn't use him to his potential. But if you really look at it like this, in the time period we're talking about, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018 WWE, that 5-year period or so was really a horrible time for WWE creative. And I mean, that's when I was doing stuff like hashtag Raw protest, and I was telling people not to watch Monday Night Raw, and everyone from Vince Russo to Jim Cornette to the Sala Monster, and everybody was telling you how horrible WWE programming was, and especially Raw, which was tedious to watch. And you had things like Kermit the Frog and the Muppets as the general manager of Raw, and all
When you
these
said
things.
those frauds were bad, you were not kidding. I
Yeah,
watched a lot of it up until the night after WrestleMania 33. After WrestleMania 33, I couldn't. I'll steal from Popeye the Sailor. I couldn't stands what I can't stands no more. You know, I just couldn't do it no more. I stuck to YouTube. I stuck to the YouTube clips. Say, okay, if something big happens, I'll look at it on YouTube. Like when Samoa Joe and Brock Lesnar were having their feud, that
right.
was a I wanted for years. So when I saw that was happening, I watched on YouTube, but I wasn't going to watch I wasn't going to watch the show and give them ratings, because I said that they're insulting my intelligence. Why would I waste my time? But I
And
understand. But I understand what you're saying.
what I'm saying is, in this era, that era, 2000, 14 to 2000, 2013 to 2019, let's say that 6 year span, Bray Wyatt kind of was the gem. He was the gem in the coal. Like he was the diamond ring in the bucket of turds, or whatever you want to call it. He was the shining star. He was one of a few shining stars, maybe him and the Shield and a few other things.
Mm-hmm.
But my point is, Bray Wyatt in this landscape, and look, neither, I had a job interview for the WWE creative team a long time ago. I can tell you that even to get the interview was a process that was difficult. And I can say that from talking to wrestlers, dealing with the WWE myself, the limited time that I did, it's a tough company to negotiate. It's a tough company for creative people to exist in. And I think for Bray Wyatt, I give him a lot of credit for getting any of his stuff on the air. And if you think about this, Jimmy, although he was only, a 28 or 30-day title reign, he did have the Bruno belt. He did have the lineage title. He won it in a elimination chamber over, Cena and AJ Styles, among others. And
Welcome onto SmackDown like he was the hero.
right. And he went into a WrestleMania. Granted, it was, kind of a lousy way they did him at that WrestleMania, losing the title in the second match of the night to Randy Orton. Um, but
That's
even in that,
the towel. Just so you know, that's when my dad threw in the towel on watching WWE programming. There were two things that made him quit: the treatment of Sami Zayn, because he was a big Sami Zayn fan, and the treatment of Bray Wyatt. My father said, why am I going to get invested in these talented individuals just to be let down? My dad said, I saw wrestling in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, and the 2000s. What it is now, if you're not in their plans, they're not going to take care of you. He said, so why am I going to bother? And my dad, the first time he's watched wrestling since then was the tribute show, because we watched that together as a family.
Well, let me say this. Even in that match where he lost the title to Orton, I'm remembering this now, and I haven't thought about this since it happened, but wasn't there a point in that match, Jimmy, where like the actual canvas of the ring kind of changed into a screen? Like they put a
Yeah,
visage.
they projected bugs onto the screen, and it's not something that a lot of people look back on fondly because they thought it was unnecessary. And I am one of those people that feels it wasn't necessary. To me, the whole match itself was pointless because we ended up putting the belt back on a guy that already had it in double-digit times. Again, it goes back to what I was saying. You could have a bad match, but if the ending is spectacular, you're going to remember that ending. It's like going to a movie, and you know this because you've reviewed movies and you've seen movies. If you go to a movie and the beginning was good, but the middle was kind of and the ending was bad, you're not going to go back and look at it and say it was a good movie. But if it starts off slow and then it kind of sucks you in, and then that ending really hits you hard to where you're like, wow, that was great, you're going to go back on and say, wow, that was not a bad movie. That match, to me, it sucked the air out of me. And that wasn't the only bad thing that happened on that card, but that's one of the things that stands out to me, because to me that just further solidified that he wasn't a priority for him. Yes, he had the belt. No one could take that away from him. I just feel that they didn't even scratch the surface with him, and that to treat him that way wasn't necessary. And I think looking back on it, anyone would be willing to say, yeah, keeping the belt on him for only 20 something days, you could have did better with that.
Well, I'm just like I said, I can totally go with the side of the conversation that Bray Wyatt wasn't used
But God bless
properly.
you had it. I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, but what I'm also saying here is if you take a look at a guy like 4 or 5 years before Bray, there was Damian Sandow who got over, uh, despite the fact that the WWE seemingly didn't want a guy like Damian Sandow to get over. He won the Money in the Bank match, but he actually lost his cash-in match to John Cena, which is kind of unprecedented. 9 times out of 10, when somebody wins the Money in the Bank, they win the title.
Champion. Absolutely. Absolutely. And what's funny about Damian Sandow is that he got over as a heel. Then they made him the Miz's stunt double. He got over as a babyface. So he got over on both sides of the character spectrum, and they just didn't reciprocate. But you could
Yeah.
go down the line with a lot of names that they didn't reciprocate. Ziggler's one, Cesaro's another. Zack Ryder is probably one of the most egregious. Not that I expected Zack Ryder to be a world champion, but the guy was the first one to use social media to gain attention. He took a chance on himself. He got over. He was selling a ton of merch, and they literally went out of their way to destroy him. And to me, that's why I worry for guys like LA Knight, who seems to be getting very over, who's selling a lot of merch. If you're not in their plans, they won't take care of you. And I feel like Bray was a victim of that because he wasn't in their spectrum of who's a priority. But I feel he very easily could have been, and I think they would have got a ton of return on that because he was brilliant up here. He understood wrestling. His father is Mike Rotunda. His uncle is Barry Windham. His grandfather was Black Jack Mulligan. All legendary performers. And I feel he's worthy of being mentioned with those guys because he was exceptionally good at what he did.
Oh, he was great. It's funny you mentioned Blackjack Mulligan, Jimmy, and now that you said those three names, both Wyndham and Rotundo, because I mean, what people probably know if they're a hardcore wrestling fan is that Wyndham Rotunda is actually named after his uncle, who is Barry Windham, and Barry Windham's, I believe it was his sister who married Mike Rotunda, and that's the two people that gave life to Wyndham Rotunda, named after the uncle. And those two guys, Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda, were the U.S. Express.
Press with
They,
Albano.
yeah, they had Captain Lou Albano as a babyface manager, and they went into WrestleMania 1,
And
the original
they lost
WrestleMania.
the Iron and Nikolai Volkov, managed by classy Freddie Blassie.
Yeah, and
with
then
deadly,
Blackjack.
with the deadly cane.
Yeah, and Blackjack Mulligan actually was a WWF Tag Team Champion with Blackjack Lanza, I believe,
managed by Bob Train Heenan.
So my point is that between Blackjack Mulligan, both Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo, and then with Bray Wyatt winning the tag team title with Matt Hardy, you have 3 generations that were all tag team champions in the WWF/E.
Don't know if we do. And honestly, I've never thought of that before. Is there another 3-generation tag team champion? I'm not so sure about that.
Let me think. I don't think Orton can say that, and I don't think unless The Rock, unless The Rock's daughter wins the tag team title somehow.
Yeah. Mike was a tag team champion. I know Rocky Johnson was with Tony Atlas, but I don't know if High Chief was, unless, like I said, like you just said, unless his daughter becomes one half of the ladies tag team. I think the Rotundas and the Wyndhams are the only family that have 3 generations of tag champions. And Bray was tag champions with Randy Orton, and he was tag team champions with Matt Hardy.
I remember.
Selfishly, I would have loved to have seen him win them with Luke Harper, Brody Lee.
Sure. Yeah. Especially now that they've both passed on. And you mentioned the Randy Orton thing, and we talked about their WrestleMania match. I think it was, you'd have to tell me, Jimmy, you probably have a better memory than I do, but was it before their WrestleMania match or after that Randy Orton and Bray Wyatt kind of had like a very early cinematic match before we were talking about cinematic wrestling matches all the time, which was really a pandemic thing? There was a few that had happened. I mean, I go all the way back to 1996, Goldust versus Roddy Piper at WrestleMania 12. I consider that to be a.
Brawl was kind of cinematic because they recorded it and then they continued the match live. But the first portion of that, where they beat each other up in the boiler room, wasn't live. That was recorded.
Right. And there was no commentary either, which made it unique. And you could even go back as far as I believe in Japan, like in 1987, Antonio Inoki and Mr. Saito wrestled on an abandoned island, and I think they just had photographs from this match, but I don't know if they were even if they even actually wrestled the match. Yeah, and then we had Terry Funk, of course, and Jerry Lawler in their their famous empty arena match. Let me just say this about Terry Funk, because we did label the video, Terry Funk tribute. Maybe we'll have to do yet another time when we talk more about Terry again, Jimmy. But I listened to Terry Funk's audiobook since the last time we talked.
Okay.
And Terry Funk had an audiobook. I think it was written and published around 2006.
Okay.
And it's called Terry Funk More Than Just Hardcore. And the cover, he's holding the branding iron. I think he's in the middle of an ECW thing. And Mick Foley writes the foreword, and then, Terry writes the book. And of course, I'm sure he had some help from some writer, some scribe like myself. But there's stories in there that I'd never heard before. The Funker sense of humor is in that book. And I do want to say that I'm a big audible, audiobook type of guy, Jimmy. So, yes. But the thing that gets me is, like, I'm really favor when the actual author reads his or her own book. In this case,
from their perspective, and it's in their voice, and that just makes it all the more better. Or when you're reading a novel and you have different actors reading the part, that makes it feel like you're in the book.
Yeah. And in this case, for whatever reason, Terry does not read his audiobook, right? Okay. So the reader, surprisingly enough, actually did a really good job. and I can't tell you who the reader was, and he's not nearly the same age as Terry Funk. The guy's probably 35 or 40.
Okay.
And he doesn't try to do a Terry Funk impersonation. He just kind of reads it straight, but I think he has the emotional voice and the gravitas in his voice to pull it off. So, and listening to the guy read the audiobook, many times I could hear Terry Funk's voice in my mind, kind of saying the words, you know what I mean? So, I just, if people
Something
are
else.
looking,
He was something else.
yeah, if people are looking for something about Terry, and just a funny thing, we won't go down this rabbit hole because there's no need to. But I did find it interesting. If you think about when this book was published, 2006, there's a wrestler that Terry keeps putting over several times in the book, like from the like as this guy I wish I would have worked with more type of thing.
Okay.
And do you want to take a guess who that might be?
Who was that?
Chris Benoit. Terry keeps saying, I wish I would have wrestled Chris Benoit more. And I'm
Well,
like,
it's unfortunate what happened, but before that, Chris
yeah,
Benoit was one of the more respected performers because he was a respected journeyman because of his time in the dungeon in Calgary, then going to Japan and becoming the Pegasus Kid, then coming to ECW and WCW, and then of course the WWF, and then his performance in the Royal Rumble where he won it from the #1 spot. You know, uh, he was one of my favorites. I have no shame in saying that, and that's why when I found out that the fact of the matter of what happened, it pissed me off even more. And then when I became a parent, it pissed me off even more.
yeah,
'Cause but Terry, listen, Terry Funk could what makes Terry Funk so unique is that Terry Funk is one of those guys. He could literally work with anyone, and immediately I'm like, okay, this is something I'd be interested in because Terry knows the buttons to push. Whether
right,
he's playing the old and middle-aged baby face that's just trying to get one more dance with glory, or whether he's that low-down Texan who just took things too far and you just want to see him get his ass kicked. Just he was masterful in that aspect that Terry knew how to play both sides of the character spectrum, and he understood that pro wrestling is ballet, is like a ballet. You're playing a part, but you're also going out there and delivering a physical performance to suck the audience into believing what you're doing. And Terry knew how to get people to believe, whether it was his propensity for violence, whether it was his crazed interviews like he used to do in the NWA days, especially when he had the goatee and he would
yeah,
scream at the cameraman and throw chairs. You legitimately thought this guy was batshit. And that's one of the things that I'll always love about Terry. He was like a chameleon. Think of Chris Jericho. The guy has so many layers to his character. Terry Funk was the same way. He went from the accomplished professional wrestler to the psychotic Texan that just wanted to prove he was the baddest apple on the block to the guy that reinvented himself in IWA Japan that was doing shit that guys half his age weren't willing to do.
right.
This first moonsault in his 40s. So if I had a hat, I'd take it off for Terry because let me tell you something. He was definitely, the word legend gets thrown around a lot. I think a little too much,
Yeah.
but he definitely deserves that moniker. Um, I feel bad that he's no longer with us, but I can happily say, and I think Terry would agree, he lived his life.
Oh yeah.
It was a life fulfilled, and you know, the product of Terry Funk is Mick Foley. And look at all that Mick Foley gave to this business. He helped make The Rock. He helped make Triple H. He brought The Undertaker to the next level. He was Austin's first opponent when he became the champion. He provided the highest rating ever in the history of Monday Night Raw. And he provided probably one of the greatest overall moments in the history of wrestling when he won his first title, and that is a result of Terry Funk inspiring Mick Foley. So, you know, good things, are passed along in life. You leave a spiritual thumbprint on every person you touch in life. And Terry Funk left his on Mick Foley.
And then
So
you could even say Mick Foley left his on Wyndham Rotundo, who became Bray Wyatt. You know,
absolutely, absolutely. Whether it's the mandible claw, whether it's the rocking chair, whether it's the style, because their body types were so similar, even though Bray was a little bit bigger than Mick, but their styles were very similar. That deranged, psychotic lunatic that you knew. Like Bray was similar to Mick in that, like Mick, he had kind eyes,
right?
but he knew how to get you to think, man, this guy's he's a couple fries short of the Happy Meal here. But and ironically, Terry was the same way. Terry
Yeah,
was he knew how to get you to to think this dude is off his rocker. Whether it's the branding iron on fire, whether it's pile driving Ric Flair through a freaking table, whether it's his interviews are things I always go back to. But those interviews that Terry did when he was in the NWA, because I binged on a lot of NWA interviews with Harley, the Horseman, Dusty, because I'm a fan of that era of the NWA. Because look at the names. You had Terry Funk, you had Harley Race, you had Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, all in the same era. That's a golden age of wrestling that it goes so underappreciated these days because they didn't do 10 Canadian destroyers and kickouts every 2 minutes. And that to me, as a fan, I try not to get aggravated, hard as that may be for some to believe, but it truly aggravates me that guys like Terry that did the things that matter so well, it gets lost in transition these days. I guess that's just the nature of time going by. Like most people from this generation, they don't know much about Muhammad Ali or
right.
Ken or Joe Frazier. They know Floyd Money Mayweather. But I've always felt if you're going to put yourself into something like wrestling or sport like football, appreciate Tom Brady for what he does. But don't forget the Iron Curtain from the 70s that would absolutely mangle any team playing now under old school rules, especially when you could beat up the receivers and the quarterback like they could back then. Terry Funk was a guy that knew, like I said earlier, he knew the buttons to push on the audience. If he wanted you to love him, he knew how to get that done. And if he wanted you to hate him, he knew the buttons to push. And that to me is what will always make Terry Funk one of the all-time greats. He had a great body of work in terms of his matches. He was an excellent promo, and the guy had both sides of the character spectrum down to a science. And I'm very fortunate that I got to see Terry Funk wrestle.
Well, yeah, the great, well said, Jimmy. And like I said on our last talk, I got to see Terry wrestle Hulk Hogan for the WWF title, Ric Flair at the Great American Bash '89 pay-per-view. I was there for that match, and then
Yeah.
I got to see Barely Legal ECW. I get to see Terry win it over Raven, and so I and then I get
What was
to
it
meet.
like, when he beat Raven? What was it like?
It was pretty. It was pretty awesome. I mean, I would say that I don't want to say it was a foregone conclusion that the Funker was walking out of there with the belt, but it kind of was. I mean, we kind of knew where this was headed as fans, but we all wanted it to happen, and we knew that Raven. We suspected Raven wasn't going to be in ECW much longer because of the way that WCW and WWF were gobbling up the top guys in ECW at the time. They were poaching them. So we saw it coming, but I think the match that was actually pretty surprising that whole night, Jimmy, was right before that. Terry had to win a 3-man ladder match with Stevie Richards and the Sandman. And that match, I mean, for what it's worth, I think was first runner up for the Pro Wrestling Illustrated Match of the Year. It was actually like a really great match, and nobody went into that evening expecting much from the 3-man match. I mean, we expect, somebody's got to win. We thought it would probably be Terry, but for 3 baby faces like Stevie Richards, Sandman, and Terry Funk to go in there with the ladder and have this match, and Terry doing the gimmick where he puts the ladder over his head.
And I believe he also picked up that ladder in like a suplex position, and he dropped it on Stevie Richards in that match. After that match, I believe Stevie Richards had run into Jim Cornette at one point, which I believe yesterday was Cornette's birthday, and he told Jim Cornette that he was one of the reasons he became a wrestler. And Jim Cornette looked at him and he says to him, "Don't blame that shit on me." But yeah, that was an excellent three-way. I loved that ECW had the style of the three-way dance in the aspect of three guys are in the match, but it's last man standing. Three guys are in the ring, someone gets pinned, that person's eliminated. Now the last two guys go at it. I loved that style of match because it meant that the last two, the better man was going to be standing when it was over. Someone wasn't going to sneak in a pin to steal the victory. You were going to have to beat both guys. And I love that about ECW. They had some, listen, for all the extreme shit that they had, and they had their fair share, but they had some really good concepts. Like Raven's Flock, I thought was a very good concept. I thought the 911 with, the guy that was guarding Paulie dangerously, I thought that was a good one. I loved Taz because he was the first, to me, he was kind of like the first Ultimate Fight style persona in pro wrestling.
Yes.
That was before Ken Shamrock. For as much as anyone could say about him personally, I thought Sabu was an excellent character because, again, could play heel or babyface, and he was good. Rob Van Dam, can't say enough about his athleticism, especially the rivalry he had with Jerry Lynn. I can't say enough about the Dudley Boys. I thought they were an excellent tag team. I think that when all is said and done, if you do a Mount Rushmore of tag teams, it's going to be difficult to keep Bubba and Devon off of it, especially when you consider every promotion they went to, similar to that of the Road Warriors. They were widely successful. The only thing they didn't do was be main eventers like the Road Warriors were main event level guys. When the Road Warriors were in promotions, they were closing shows because that's how over they were. That's why it's called, the Big Pop is called, I believe it was called the Warrior Pop.
The Road Warrior Pop, yeah.
But like I said, Terry did so much for ECW, and Paul Heyman has talked about this ad nauseum, that Terry Funk was, he was like Tommy Dreamer in that he was part of the lifeblood of ECW, in that he was their veteran. Like Paul Heyman's mentality of wrestling is have a group of young guys and have that one legend around that's the anchor. Terry Funk was the anchor for Extreme Championship Wrestling. And I don't believe that Barely Legal succeeds the way it did without Terry Funk. So if you look at it from that lens, Terry Funk was revolutionary.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And Terry, even, people talk about, Roddy Piper and Hulk Hogan being the first wrestlers to go into mainstream movies. Well, actually, Terry was right there with him doing Roadhouse, and he was actually on a TV series on ABC called Wild Side, which is kind of one of those shows that didn't make it that should have. And so, Terry had a very
Terry was out there. He was out there.
He was out there. I actually have been watching on YouTube a bunch of Terry Funk stuff. I watched there's an interview, a promo actually that he does. It's, if you look up Terry Funk, I Have a Dream promo. It's it's him decimating Ric Flair. And I mean, I guess there was some controversies with Terry's promos because at times the baby faces, like probably Rick and that ugg sucking dog Dusty Rhodes, like they felt like Terry's yeah, Dusty sucks eggs, the famous T-shirt.
I love it.
They felt that that Terry's promos were so good and so pointed that Terry was going to get over as the baby face and make whoever it was, Dusty or Rick, make them the heel by default. And so, but that's the level of Terry Funk, that he was able to get a guy like Ric Flair, who's NWA World Champion at the time in '89. He's actually getting like real emotion out of Flair. Like he's really getting Flair pissed off at him legitimately, just based on the excellence of his promos. And
when you can work the boys, you're next level.
yeah, and it just seemed, and the thing is, the other thing with the book really goes into Terry's relationship with his dad, how much he honored his father, which I'm sure you can relate to, Jimmy, And the difference in styles between Terry and his brother Dory Funk Jr. I mean, Dory Funk was kind of like, of his era. He was like a Lance Storm or a Sir William Regal, or
He was a hard-nosed, serious, technical wrestler. He was kind of like Bret Hart, but with a little less, say charisma, but a little less personality. Because Bret did have personality, and some people knocked Bret for saying, "Oh, he didn't have charisma." I think we can all admit, charisma is not having an over-the-top personality. Charisma is where you can get the audience to connect with you. Bret had it. Terry Funk had it. Dory Funk Jr. had it, but to a degree, because he was more. You didn't really get a lot of emotion out of Dory Funk Jr. when he would cut promos. Terry was the opposite. You got nothing but emotion. And what makes Dory and Terry so interesting, both guys had one reign as NWA champion, and both guys lost the title to Harley Race. Harley Race defeated both Funk brothers to win the NWA championship. And I believe Harley had it 8 times. Well, 2 of those reigns came at the expense of the Funks. So, I'm sure, I never heard what Harley had to say about the Funks, but I'm sure that Harley understood that they were good at what they did, because, back in those days, you weren't NWA champion if you weren't putting butts in seats, because it was very political as to who got that spot. And if you got the vote from the NWA commission, that meant you were putting butts in seats no matter what territory you went to. So Terry put butts in seats, as did his brother. But Terry, like I said, I've said this twice already, he was a chameleon. This guy had so many layers to his presentation. You never knew what you were going to get with Terry. And that, to me, is what kept his longevity. It wasn't just the sickness that he talked about, that he loved being in the ring. People never got sick of Terry Funk. That's the thing. I don't think people ever got sick of seeing this dude come out and do his thing. Yeah, people were worried because he would be up there in age and he'd be doing shit that he had no business doing. But at the same time, you said this guy loves wrestling so much, he don't want to quit. Like, I remember the last time I saw Terry wrestle was at ECW One Night Stand 06 when he teamed up with Tommy Dreamer against Edge and Mick Foley. And I'm sitting here and I'm watching and I'm listening to Joey Styles do commentary. Terry Funk, his slaps feel like punches and his punches feel like bricks. And he would hit and he'd hit you with that left hand. And it was just, I mean, Terry, I feel like I'm marking out over him, but I love Terry Funk. And the guy was just too good. He was too good. Stupid question. Did Terry ever have a feud with Piper?
That's a great question. And as far as I know,
going at it.
I don't. I'm trying to put them in the same place at the same time. They were both in the WWF in the 1985 to 86 era, but they were both heels, I believe, until, because Terry kind of left abruptly. Let me get into a little bit of that, because on YouTube, once again, I saw live in person Terry Funk challenge Hulk Hogan for the WWF title, but around that same loop, as they used to call it, there's a match on YouTube. There's 2 actually. There's a Saturday Night's Main Event match, Hogan versus Funk, and then there's a house show match, Hogan versus Funk, where Terry does get pinned by Hogan, but he gets pinned with like a schoolboy roll up. Like he doesn't even take the leg drop, which I thought was great. And the other thing I learned about Terry's run in that mid-'80s WWF thing, he actually had like a really bad arm injury at the time. And so, so he's wrestling, and it's kind of like when Vader was in there in the mid-'90s, like, well, you want to get money and you want to go to work, but like he's working with like half an arm, like so when you see Terry Funk in the mid-'80s in WWF, he's kind of got a bit of a, not that he's fat or anything, but he's got a bit of a paunchy belly. He doesn't look as good as he looks in '89. Like 3 or 4 years later, he looked ripped.
He looked fit.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing is, he was actually working hurt, and he was still doing great stuff. So that's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever watched the Wrestling Classic, the WWF's first ever pay-per-view. The first pay-per-view you could get in the comfort of your own home was the WWF Classic. Terry's in it. I won't give it away, but
No, I
let's just, yeah,
have.
you'll be surprised what happens with Terry Funk in that classic tournament. It's well worth watching. Randy Savage is in it. Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith wrestle as singles. There's a Hogan Roddy Piper championship match on that show, and that was the first ever WWF pay-per-view you could watch at home. The closed circuit stuff was before that. But I was going to say about Funk, this is a guy that had the LJN rubber action figure. He was like in the second or third set. This was a guy that wrestled, like you said, a territory champion with the Funks and the Briscoes and all those guys in the mid to late 70s. This was a guy that was second generation. In the book, he talks about his father's Texas death matches and stuff. This is a guy that did big things in Japan, probably a bigger legend in Japan than he was in the States, if you can believe that. And this is a guy that did the ECW thing, and he was there for the dying days of WCW. And just his insights, like he's talking about the dying days of WCW, and he said, I couldn't believe, like, he's like, I knew this promotion was doomed. We all knew that, we were going down the toilet as far as WCW. And it was kind of liberating because then you can just do whatever you want, like creatively.
You knew it was a sinking ship, so there was really no accountability because
Right.
was basically a 3-ring circus by the time 99 and 2000. It was pretty much, it was CTD, circling the drain. It was just about done. And that's unfortunate. I will always say, as much as I don't care for what WCW turned into after 98, I feel like WCW going out of business was one of the worst things that ever happened to the business, because number one, it took away an option for the wrestlers, it took away an option for the fans, and it gave the WWE a blank check to have absolutely no accountability when they would put on bad shows. I don't think you get the years upon years of horrendous booking of playing to an audience of one if WCW is still stomping around. So, it's a shame. I will always say that it was one of the worst things that ever happened to the business, because, as much as I think that AEW has problems that they need to fix, I think them existing
Right.
is a plus for the profession, because it gives the wrestlers and the fans another option if what they're seeing from the evil empire is not satisfying them. And Terry Funk worked everywhere. There wasn't a territory that Terry didn't work in. There wasn't a country he didn't work in. Terry left his mark everywhere he could possibly go. And one thing, that's one thing, Terry was very similar to guys like Bruiser Brody and Abdul the Butcher. They never really stayed in one place for too long. He made his mark and he moved on. He was truly, if there was that, like Cody Rhodes said this at the tribute show, if there was ever a cowboy, it was Terry.
Yeah. That's a great point. And I think in the forward to the book, Mick Foley is the one that says that watching Terry Funk in 1989 NWA, where basically he was a commentator at Wrestle War 89 in Nashville. And then he goes from literally the commentating booth into the ring to attack Ric Flair, Jim Ross holding the microphone. And then that becomes the main event program basically until November.
Mm-hmm.
And Mick Foley says he'd never seen a wrestler that could come into a territory and take over like that. Like, there's no preliminary matches. He's not being squash guys on TV. He's from the commentating booth to the number one heel for 6 or 7 months. And as a wrestling fan, Jimmy, it's one of my proudest, fan accomplishments that I got to be there for their first big match in Baltimore. I did want to say this. We talked about cult leaders when we we're talking about Bray Wyatt. We can't forget about Raven. You did mention Raven. So before Raven can say, what about Raven? And I don't know if you watched it, Jimmy, but I do have a 4-part mini series on this, on One Pro Wrestling and Sports Fan, Chris and the Coffee Girl, the Philadelphia Experiment, which is 4 hours of me and Raven going back and forth trying to make a movie together, which is pretty interesting. So, and as far as, the WWE, we talked about some of the stuff they've done with special needs kids and Make-A-Wish. They also, when the passing of Bray Wyatt occurred a few weeks ago. They dedicated all the monies from all the T-shirts and memorabilia and hats and everything of Bray Wyatt to the family of Wyndham Rotundo. So I did my part. I went out and I got I think this is an Uncle Howdy T-shirt. Yeah. So this is and I'm assuming that the money will still go to the family because this was the character that I believe Bray created for his brother. And that was another thing, Jimmy, that we could talk about for another hour. But it's like they didn't really do much with Bo Dallas on the. Or my buddy Carl's checking in. Hi, Carl. How you doing, pal? And Carl and I did a nice Batman discussion today on one Mike Messier channel. Yeah, actually, I saw before we went on tonight, Jimmy. I went to see Batman Begins. It's playing in the big screen again, so it's they've revived. Yeah, they revived all the Nolan films. So I saw I saw Batman Begins Sunday, and I saw The Dark Knight tonight with Heath Ledger as the Joker. So, but as far as the Bray Wyatt thing goes, really is shocking. It's shocking. I think this is one of those things, like I said last time, Jimmy, I put it up there with, yes, there's all these too many wrestlers have passed away at a young age. Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, Road Warrior Hawk. Yeah, we could go on and on, unfortunately. Doug Furness. I mean, so many guys, David Von Erich, but there's this certain breed of guys. And I basically say to me, it's David Von Erich, Brian Pillman, Eddie Guerrero, and Bray Wyatt. I mean, that's what I would put in this certain class of guys where it's not that they were mainstream crossover successes. It's not that they were the guys, they weren't the Hulk Hogan, Bruno Sammartino, face of the company for 10 or 12 years. It was these guys had a
mainstay in the business.
Yeah, they had a special spark. Eddie Guerrero, Brian Pillman, David Von Erich, Bray Wyatt, where it's like they were great. They accomplished a lot. But I think for fans like you and me, what we kind of think about is, man, they could have done so much more. And I think, David Von Erich was 24 years old when he passed away.
He was WA champion at one point.
Yeah.
That's what they were building towards. He was going to end up taking the belt off of Flair.
Right. And I just think that the difference maybe with Bray is, like we said, Bray did get his little 1-month title reign with the Bruno belt. But I think, as you've pointed out, so much stuff he could have done had he been blessed with more time. The other thing, folks, is, I mean, I don't know where everybody stands with this ridiculous pandemic thing, but apparently, Bray suffered from COVID in March of 2023. It left a residue. I'm probably going to go get another vaccine booster when it's available in this area. So it's one of those topics where it's kind of like a thing that people get divisive about because, oh, it's this or it's that. But, if you are someone that was thinking about it, I guess I just put myself in the mindset of, man, I've been lucky. I haven't gotten this damn pandemic. I haven't gotten this virus. I don't want to get it because I think, like Bray is a bigger guy, I may not do very well with it. So that kind of lends me to think, man, maybe in honor of Bray or whatever, I'll go get another booster myself.
I can tell you this. I've had it. I have suffered through it. I have taken care of patients that have had it, and I have taken care of patients who have passed away because it's a horrendous pestilence that's been unleashed on humanity. My godfather passed away from it in 2020. And from what I was told, the virus itself exacerbated whatever lingering issues he had that he kept to himself. So I could tell you this. If something doesn't feel right, get checked out. Don't, like I said at the top of the show, do not wait. If something doesn't feel right, no one knows your body better than you. Whether you feel like you just have the sniffles or whether something doesn't feel right somewhere, get yourself checked out, folks. If not for yourself, for the people that care about you, because as the proof of the passing of Bray Wyatt is that tomorrow is not guaranteed. So take care of yourselves, and be vigilant. Be vigilant. That's all I can really say. I can't tell someone whether to get a vaccine or not. The only thing I can say as one human being to another, just be vigilant when it comes to your health.
Yeah, Jimmy, one thing that I do now that I should probably just start bringing the mask with me, and whenever I go into public restrooms, put the mask on, because I do kind of I don't like to wear the mask all the time, but in a public restroom, I think that's where some of this stuff gets circulated. I'll probably, if I can hold myself accountable, I'll do that. But sometimes I just go in and I'll do this little trick. when I'm going into the men's room, I cover up my nose because I don't want the germs from all these other human beings.
It's the hardest because you're so warm, and when you're wearing the mask, what most people that wear the mask, they'll notice they have headaches. There's a reason for that, because when you're breathing, you're taking in oxygen and you're expelling CO2. When you have that mask on, that CO2 is bouncing back and going back into your nostrils and back into your system. That will cause a headache. So wearing the mask too often will eventually cause a headache, because when you breathe normally, like I stated, you're expelling CO2. If you have that mask on, you're not expelling CO2 the way you're supposed to, because that's the whole purpose of the respiratory system. So
thanks for the medical advice. Let's wrap up for tonight. Jimmy and I are going to come back. We're going to talk after we go off the air about doing some more podcasts for you guys. But I think a good way to end, Jimmy, is if you can, real quick, think of one match of Bray's and one match of Terry's to recommend to people. I will do the same. If you want me to go first, I will, just so you can think about it for a second.
Please do. Please do.
Okay, so I'm going to make a couple of recommendations, and I'm going to make a point to find these matches myself. The first one, starting with Terry Funk, and you could go to all the Dusties and Jerry Lawlers and Flair matches you want; they're all great. But I'm going to make a bit of a recommendation that maybe people have heard about, but they haven't watched, or they haven't watched it in a while. WCW, the first ever Halloween Havoc. An interesting side note, WCW's Halloween Havoc pay-per-view was never actually held on Halloween. Just a funny little thing. But WCW Halloween Havoc, the very first one, I believe, from Philadelphia. Bruno Sammartino is the special guest referee. Gary Hart in the corner of the one and only Terry Funk and the Great Muta. Very unusual tag team. I think they call themselves the J-Tech Corporation or something like that. And they're taking on the two guys that they fought in singles matches at the Great American Bash in Baltimore, because this feud went on for months. They're taking on the Stinger. And Muta, I think, was the world TV champion going into this match. So across is the Sting. Sting's on the other team, and he's the guy that Muta beat for that title. And Sting's partner is his, former rival, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, the world heavyweight champion. And this match kind of is sandwiched between the Bash, Great American Bash 89 pay-per-view, July 23rd from Baltimore. In August, you had Dick Slater taking Terry Funk's place with Great Muta against Flair and Sting on a Clash of Champions. That's the infamous plastic bag over the head, where Terry Funk put a plastic bag over Nature's head. So this match is kind of not quite the culmination, because we still have Flair and Funk at the Clash of Champions I Quit. But this is the Thunderdome cage. So I'm not going to give it away. There's just a lot of fun stuff in this match. It's a match that's kind of the predecessor to the Hell in the Cell, believe it or not. So it's all the way back at Halloween Havoc 89. The rest of the card is not particularly memorable, except there's a really tight Brian Pillman versus Lex Luger U.S. title match. So I would say that that's a good one. Watch the Luger and Pillman as a warm-up, and then fast forward to the main event. You got Bruno Sammartino as the guest ref. You got Gary Hart in the corner of Muta and Funk, and you got Ole Anderson, believe it or not, in the corner of Sting and Flair. For my Bray Wyatt pick, Jimmy, I'm going to have to dig, because I'm having a flashback. there was a couple of weeks, I want to say the summer of 2015 or 2016, the Dudleys, Bubba Ray and Devon came back for like a goodbye tour to the WWE. I didn't like what they did with them because they lost a whole lot.
Yeah.
But there was a couple of weeks where like the Dudleys were feuding with the Wyatts. The first week they did, I think it was the two Dudleys and I want to say Tommy Dreamer against Rowan, Harper, and Bray Wyatt. And then the match that I'm remembering pretty well, if I have this right, I think it was all four members. Bray Wyatt, the new guy, the giant Braun Strowman, he was like the fourth guy.
Yes.
Eric Rowan and Luke Harper. I believe it was against Tommy Dreamer, Bubba Ray, and Devon,
And Rhino.
and Rhino, and it was in Philadelphia. And then they even gave Rhino like some work after that. They teamed him up with Heath Slater, but I think this was Rhino's big shocking return, and this was in Philly. And this was an 8-man match. I want to say it was just on Raw, and I think it was
it might have been.
Yeah, and I'm just telling you that, like, like I said, those were not very good years for the WWE, but this stuff was really good. So I'm going to say that I'm going to look for that match myself, and I got to find that myself. I got to watch the Shield versus the Wyatt family again too. So Jimmy, what's your recommendations, buddy?
Well, for the legendary Terry Funk, I'm going to suggest, if you don't have a squeamish stomach, find the match he had with Cactus Jack in IWA Japan to determine the King of the Death match. That was wild, and it was crazy. For a secondary match with Terry, the first match he had with Ric Flair. Not the I Quit match.
The Baltimore match.
The Baltimore match.
That's where I was. I was at that. Yeah.
That match was wild. And the fact that that match wasn't the climax should let you know they were just getting started, because that's the chemistry that Flair and Funk had. I have not seen that tag match with Sting and Muta, so I have to watch that match. So you've given me something to do. In terms of Bray Wyatt, there are two that come to mind. Number one, you absolutely have to watch his, a show that was absolutely horrendous, which was Royal Rumble 2014. You got to watch the match between Bray Wyatt and Daniel Bryan. They had a tremendous one-on-one match with a clear cut. And to me, this match is living proof. The old formulas will always work if you read the room, if you see who your audience is into. Babyface, heel, they both you knew what both characters were about. Bray in that match was portrayed as a villain who could get the job done by himself, even though he was a cult leader. What I liked about that match was that Harper and Rowan were trying to help Bray gain control of Bryan. And then when they finally had a one-on-one match, it was like Bray was the nuclear option. And that to me is how you book a cult leader. You let his minions do most of the work. And when it comes time for the big match, the nuclear option is the leader himself. And when he gets in there, big things happen. The second match that I must recommend to anyone that has not seen it, you got to watch the match where Bray Wyatt teamed with Luke Harper and Eric Rowan to take on all three members of the Shield at Elimination Chamber 2014. It is, in my humble opinion, the greatest six-man tag match the WWE ever did. In the entire history of their company, I have never seen a six-man tag from the WWE that, number one, had the crowd's interest, that, number two, delivered in every aspect from characters to in-ring work, and number three, provided an insanely satisfying conclusion to the point where this match has the best replay value of most matches that I've seen. I can watch Flair versus Savage WrestleMania 8 as many times as I can. I could watch Undertaker and Mankind at Survivor Series 96, even though Mick himself told me he felt they lost a step that night. I can watch Brett and Austin in the I Quit match, never get sick of it. I could watch Terry and Flair in their I Quit match, never get sick of it. This match, the Wyatts and the Shield, their very first encounter with each other. The only sadness I have is that this match did not take place at WrestleMania. Because when I look at what the Shield was doing that next month, they were fighting Kane and the New Age Outlaws in suits. And then the Wyatts were being served up to John Cena, basically 3-on-1, and Cena beat him. That match that they had at Elimination Chamber belonged on a stage like WrestleMania, but fortunately for all 6 individuals, 2 of which are no longer with us, unfortunately. That match was so good, people will remember it forever. And anyone who watches that match, you will come back to Mikey and myself and you'll say, that's pro wrestling. And God rest both their souls. Terry Funk, Bray Wyatt, we appreciate everything you did for the pro wrestling business, and we only wish we had more time with you.
Well, Jim, go ahead, Jimmy.
That's all I can say.
Well, Jimmy, this has been a great conversation, buddy. Thank you once again. Stay on the air after I sign off, because we'll talk about doing more episodes. And like I said, we could probably do 10 episodes on just these 2 guys. I kept thinking the last couple of weeks, man, not to spend another, but just if these guys had ever crossed paths and done a program with each other, my God, can you imagine Bray Wyatt and Terry Funk in Memphis, like 1983? Like if you had a time machine and put Bray Wyatt in Memphis in 83, and with all this, we talk about his creativity and with all the corporate ties that the WWE had. But what if Bray Wyatt, it was time machine back in 83 Memphis, and with the reigns that those guys had, the free reigns and all the crazy characters and the, Kamala, and then like the lizard hunter and all the crazy things they had in Memphis, Bray Wyatt would have taken over, and he would have, and bring Terry Funk in to face him. And I mean, my God, that would have been awesome.
He's a guy that if he was around in the 80s, not that he needs a manager, because he very easily could talk for himself, but this is a guy that I could absolutely see being linked up with Gary Hart, butting heads with Muda and Terry Funk, because he wants to be the head honcho. And let me tell you something. The promos between Terry and Bray would have been legendary, because they were both masters of the microphone. And the moves that they delivered, whether it's Terry's Texas pile driver or Bray Wyatt's sister Abigail, their signature maneuvers were always delivered so perfectly that when they were hit, you knew that was it. That's it. It's over. And thinking of Bray in the 80s, could you imagine him and Jake the Snake Roberts? Could you imagine Bray and the Macho Man Randy Savage? Could you imagine Bray Wyatt, the cult leader character, going up against a great baby face like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, trying to convert Steamboat, never being able to break him into being a servant? If I can't break you in as a servant, I'll just break you. And I think Bray would have been, he was born in the wrong time, because let me tell you something, in an era of characters, he would have thrived. He absolutely would have thrived. And that's why Bray Wyatt is a legend, because he would have been good in any era. You stick him in the if you stuck him in the new generation era, he would have been one of the only good things about that time. The new generation era really wasn't that good. Brett, right, Taker were like the only shining lights in the WWF. You drop Bray Wyatt in there, he easily becomes one of the biggest stars they have, because his character's so interesting. You drop him in the Attitude Era, he would have been at home, because back then you did whatever you had to do to get over. Same thing in the 80s. You drop him in the 80s, he would have been a success. And that's one of the things that as a fan, it breaks my heart that he came up in an era where if you weren't a priority, they didn't take care of you. If he was around in an era where everyone got their time to shine, this guy's legacy would look completely different. It would look completely different. It would be much bigger. He would have been portrayed as someone you take seriously, that when he comes after you, you're in trouble. And you put him in the ring with Terry Funk.
Yeah.
That would have been a Texas death match of the ages, because he would have pushed Terry to the point where I could just see Bray sitting in that rocking chair with the lantern saying, as sure as I blow this flame out, your dreams of living up to your father's legacy are going up in smoke, Terry. Run. And Terry that would have been, could you imagine Terry Funk confronting Bray with the freaking flaming branding iron? That would have been where Bray shows not fear, but like, is he serious? I think it would have been great. Now you just put me down a rabbit hole. Now I'm going to be thinking, because that's awesome. Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking. I was thinking, like, Bray Wyatt goes to Texas and feuds with Bruiser Brody, and like Brody putting the big boot on Bray, and he's got the Hawaiian shirt and the hat, and Brody kicks him in the face, and the hat goes flying in Texas Stadium, and Bray Wyatt in ECW in the middle
What
of
family of Von Erichs.
That would be, yeah, the Wyatt family versus the Von Erichs. I mean, that would take it to a whole other level, man. That's like some intergalactic warfare, because you got the wholesome, we thought they were wholesome anyway, the Von Erich family, the good-looking jocks against the backwoods, Koresh type guys right there in Texas, and Waco is not far from Denton, Texas either. So that would be very interesting.
Just a quick question for you before we go off the air. Who was the one villain from the 80s that could have turned the Wyatts into anti-heroes in your mind? Who's the heel that could have made them anti-heroes?
I would suggest Tully Blanchard, because Tully Blanchard, nobody liked Tully because he was such a good heel. Guys like Piper was like, people eventually liked Piper, but Tully never did that, because Tully was a heel. Just looking at Tully, he's got like this little upturned nose, and he's kind of a little
out of the Horseman.
Yeah, Tully Blanchard of the Horseman. Yeah. But even before, like, Tully's best work was actually before he became a Horseman. Tully's best year in wrestling was like 1984. He was actually feuding with Ric Flair a little bit on Mid-Atlantic TV. And Tully Blanchard took what became the NWA World Television title. He made it something, because before Tully had it, it was just a Mid-Atlantic TV title. It was barely recognized. Tully made that belt into something. He did this thing where I think he put like $2,500 on the line, silver. He had like a bag of silver dollars or something, that if you beat Tully for the TV title, you get the silver dollars. He brought in Baby Doll on, like, they literally had a contest where women would send in tapes and photographs, and then that's how they got Baby Doll in the mix, and I'm telling you, Tully Blanchard was really 83, 84.
The Big Horseman fan. But
yeah,
his best work was pre-Horseman. But my dad told me about all those guys. He told me about the Minnesota Wrecking Crew with which was Ole and Arn Anderson. The East-West Connection, which I think was Adrian Adonis and Jesse the Body Ventura. He told me about a lot of those old makeshift tag teams. And eventually Arn and Tully became a tag team, and they didn't do too bad for themselves at the tag.
Yeah. Arn and Tully won the NWA World Tag Team title over the Rock and Roll Express in October of '87. I got to see a house show match where they defended the titles against the Rock and Rolls, and then, a year and a half later, they go over and they beat Demolition for the WWF titles. And but I got to answer your question with one last thing here. The Wyatt family, if you had all four guys, Bray, Braun, Eric, if you had all four of them, here's a group that you may not remember. They could have feuded within Texas. Devastation Incorporated.
Gander.
Yeah. And it's
what was it? Kamala, Cactus Jack. Who else was in that group?
Well, Cactus came into a later version of it. He came into it in the USWA era, but it was the early, like, what I'm thinking of, the '83 is really the Misfits of Science. You got Kamala, Missing Link, I think you had the Super Destroyers, which were the Irwin brothers under mask, Bill, Bill Irwin and Scott Hogg Irwin. And Devastation Incorporated, Killer Khan was in Devastation Incorporated. Basically, any foreigner or any person that was insane was thrown, like the hodgepodge. Like the Devastation Incorporated was kind of like what the Dungeon of Doom wanted to be. Like the Dungeon of Doom
But
was really goofy.
and our Akbar's group, they knew how to get heat,
Yeah.
especially WCW really capitalized on the fact that these guys are nuts. They can't be controlled. You need to watch out for them. And it only pushed them to cheer for whatever babyface going up against them.
And there was even a thing, Jimmy, where Devastation Incorporated were they were so good at being hated, they would actually put the Freebirds, who were still heels at the time. The Freebirds are heels feuding with the Von Erichs, but just for fun, they would put the heel Freebirds against the heel Devastation Incorporated. And when those
Weird.
Right, and when those matches happened, Devastation Inc. was the heels, and the Freebirds. Although the fans in Texas were like, "Well, we hate the Freebirds because they are fighting the Von Erichs," but tonight they're fighting Devastation Incorporated, and we gotta root for these guys.
Yeah,
Okay, I want
Devastation Incorporated. They need to. They're too much of a threat to everybody. The heels.
right. So imagine them against the Wyatt family. Okay, I want to wrap things up, Jimmy. If you have any final words, go ahead and say them real quick, and then we'll talk off the air.
Say that I really enjoyed being on here. I look forward to doing more shows with you, Mikey. Rest in peace, Terry Funk. Rest in peace, Bray Wyatt. And their memories will live. Their memories will outlive the both of us, because what they did for pro wrestling will never die.
All right, thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time. Subscribe and like. Thank you.